Hi, thank you for joining us on today's conversation. Today I'll be speaking with Matt Bell about beginning birding. Matt's a travel specialist in the EcoTravel division of the Connecticut Audubon, and he uh, brings people on nature trips both abroad and in the U.S. and locally. So welcome, Matt. Um,
Thank you.
Matt is a very talented birder, and also very gracious in helping beginners and both advice, and he's a very sane voice on Facebook pages that sometimes help us ID books or whatever, birds. So anyways, we want to thank you. So I'm
Sure.
a newish birder, so I'm hoping to ask questions that are going to be helpful from a perspective of someone who's either considering, starting birding or is still relatively new. Um, so we're going to start with the question we're going to ask everyone who participates, which is what got you started in birding?
I got started in birding back in high school at East Catholic High School in Manchester. My AP biology teacher gave us a final to go bird watching, and I quickly fell in love. I'd always been in love with dinosaurs, and that was what I went to school, to college to study, but I realized that birds are dinosaurs, and I just fell into it there, and it's snowballed since. So that was about 7 years ago now.
Okay, so 7 years of birding, i.e. dinosaurs. Okay. So I know when I started going out and such, I, see a new bird and it's all very exciting. But then when you start hanging out with more experienced birders, they sound, they're not quite as excited because they realize that the populations are declining pretty dramatically. Again, new birder, everything's new and exciting, but more experienced folks notice the difference. And I was wondering if you might be able to speak about that a little. And I know there's also some talk about changing the Migratory Bird Act and such. So what can you say about the changes in birding, and the causes as well?
I'd say, we all know the historic representation of a canary in a coal mine.
Hmm.
And miners would bring canaries with them in case there was toxic gas. And we're seeing that same type of reaction now, but on a worldwide scale. These birds, all birds, are our canaries and telling us about what's going on in the world. So when we start to see bird numbers decrease, that's supposed to be and should be a red flag that something's going on, that we need to look into more and try to understand what is causing these declines in species numbers. And they've dropped. Cornell and a couple other research centers and colleges put out a study last year that said 70% of birds have declined in the past 40 years or so now, 40, 50 years, which is really scary to think about, because we do go out, we see a lot of birds out birding, and then you kind of sit back and realize that if they've really declined 70%, what was it like 50 years ago? How many more birds were there? And it kind of makes you think a little bit more.
Right. And what can you say about, so there was that big study. I remember when that came out, people were pretty stunned by the numbers.
I mean, it's the national news.
Yeah. And what can you say about human behaviors? I know we've talked about this a little bit in terms of, between yards and, the choices we make while we're hiking or whatever. What are some other contributing things that we can look at?
So the best way we can help the birds is, planting native flowers, native grasses, native trees. I know a lot of native landscaping has really taken a foothold in the past couple of years as people start to become a little more environmentally conscious. And realize that you bring some color to your yard, and native yards are great because they require less maintenance, because these plants are evolved to live in your yard. They're not something foreign. And a lot of foreign plants, such as Japanese burning bush, are now completely banned from being planted in the state because of how invasive they are. So planting native, when you're hiking, leave no trace is the big thing when you're hiking or camping. And that basically means, if you pack it in, you pack it out. That includes apple cores or banana peels. Those aren't native to the environment, and they can be detrimental to native species, not just birds, but all native things. A little more controversial one is keeping your cats indoors. Cats are not native to North America. The birds here are not evolved to predators, and research has shown that cats are actually more prone and more effective at killing birds than they are mice and rats. And it does a better job if keeping your cat indoors is better for them as well, because you're going to prevent them from getting hit by a car or getting sick or being caught out in the cold or the rain and
Right.
down by a predator. You're going to guarantee them a better long-lived life as long as you give them something to do. Some people might say, oh, my cat is restless at home, a
Mhm.
scratching post or a couple more toys for it. The
Right.
cats really self-entertain themselves, and they don't need a lot of maintenance or attention like dogs do.
Right. That's true.
Giving them stuff to do inside the house is a great way to keep them out, because they do cause big effects on
Uh-huh.
the area. And also, providing bird houses. That's the simplest thing. Bird houses and food in the winter. Black oil sunflower seed in the winter, just a
Uh-huh.
typical bluebird house. And in the summer, just providing spots for these birds to safely breed. And
No, I've heard some people on occasion will say like, oh, feeding the birds isn't good for them ultimately because then they don't know how to fend for themselves or what can you say about that?
so the only types of birds I would recommend and not feeding, and this is strongly recommend not feeding, are birds of prey.
Okay.
Owls, raptors, etc. That's because they need to hunt living things,
Hmm.
and they might learn and become trained to a specific spot that
Hmm.
can get them sick. They might not learn how to hunt on their own if they're younger. They might realize that hanging out by a roadside and that is a place to get food and then get hit by vehicles.
Right.
Feeding songbirds is fine.
Hmm.
Now, in Connecticut, especially in other areas that have bears, we recommend only doing it in the winter.
Right.
Putting it up once the bears hibernate and taking it down once the bears come out to prevent your own yard from being destroyed by bears, but also to protect the bears and your neighbors. But feeding seeds to birds is fine. I think there's been some past studies, and I'm not exactly sure on the numbers, but birds only take about 25% of their food from a bird feeder, the songbirds.
Okay.
They are very effective at finding their food sources outside, and providing that food in the winter is phenomenal because, especially if it's a really cold winter and they can't find food, they have a reliable spot to come and
Right.
get food.
Right.
It is something to keep up. If your feeder goes empty and then you leave it empty for a couple of days, then fill it back up, and the birds don't come back necessarily, that's just
Right.
because they've decided that it's not as reliable. They're going to go somewhere else. They will come back.
Right.
We get a lot of questions when people have put up bird feeders for the first time or hummingbird feeders for the first time and say, I don't have any birds yet. What can I do to attract them? It's simply a waiting game. The birds will find it. It will take them time, because especially if there's another reliable spot nearby, they
Right.
might hang out there for a little bit longer because they can be reliable there and only sometimes come to a new feeder setup.
I know I need to scrub my feeders and refill them, so I'm not putting food in until I get them scrubbed. So
Yeah, especially with hummingbird feeders, those never use red food coloring or anything that's red, artificially colored in feeders for hummingbirds and also for orioles. If you're
Mhm.
using orange one, just pure sugar, not natural cane sugar. There's a lot of information online on
Mhm.
the exact types of sugars to use, but it is important, especially as it gets hotter, especially as we get into summer, to clean the feeders every 2 to 3 days,
Right.
simply to prevent bacterial growth, and which can then poison the hummingbirds.
Right. So I think another thing we touched on when we spoke previously was also just when you get to a hiking location, whatever, to make sure you follow the posted rules.
Yeah,
I know sometimes, dogs, people love to take their dogs out, but there are some locations where it actually can create a lot of danger for the animals that live there. They could be nesting. So really just follow any rules that are posted. Oftentimes there's a bigger reason for the rule than, just we don't want a dog here, you know.
absolutely. And one of the most important places, I would say, if I had to pick a habitat to really say keep your dog on a leash, is the
Mhm.
beach, or if
Mhm.
there's nesting bird signs at the beach,
Yes.
and if there's a prairie or open field area. Those are A lot of those areas are specially managed for ground nesting birds.
Right.
So a dog running through the grasses could easily accidentally crush a nest or some youngins. So it's always good to be mindful.
Mhm.
Bring your dogs out. Dogs love to be outside.
Yep.
Keep them on a leash as much as possible, especially if the area such as Nature Conservancy land or Connecticut Audubon Society land, have banned dogs off leash.
Right. Right. So, yep, just follow the rules. Um, okay. So, say someone decides they want to give birding a try. What do you think are some of the most important steps to get them started?
Most important steps are, in no specific order, I say one, you need optics, you need
Hmm.
binoculars.
Hmm.
Uh, Two, you need a guidebook. You need a book that you can reference or an app that you can reference.
Right.
And that's really all you need.
Guidebook. I know it's backward, but I just got this today, so I'm very excited. Yep.
Yeah, but the only two things you really need are binoculars and a guidebook.
Okay.
And it's important once you have those to understand how your binoculars work, understand how to use them.
Right.
And when it comes to a guidebook, I would always suggest looking at range maps where you're going to find certain species, because there are examples of species that look very similar in the United States,
right,
but might not be found in your given area. So it's always important to look at the range map. And I would strongly suggest against searching a photo that you took through Google or looking up a description of the bird on Google, because a lot of the Google descriptions don't accurately represent your area.
Right.
If that's the case, I do recommend joining one of the Facebook groups such as Connecticut Birds or Connecticut Audubon Bird and Nature Photos, and we will gladly help you identify and explain to you why that is the bird that you're seeing.
Yeah, and you guys are great about explaining. It's not just like, no, you're wrong. It's like, here's why. And I'll just show again backward, but like that's a range map. This is for the West, but you can see where you might expect to see the bird. And I know when I started birding, every bird I saw I thought was incredibly rare and special. And you quickly learn that it's probably the most obvious answer is probably the right one, which is it's not something incredible. Maybe it is, but not usually. So range maps is a great thing. And so that was another question I had, is if you're going out alone. So it is a little different to go out with other people sometimes. So I know I've also used some apps that are good, at least to get you started. So
absolutely,
that's a good thing to look at as well.
Yes, the best app to use as a beginner birder is going to be Merlin Bird ID by Cornell. You'll hear me mention Cornell a lot. Cornell's Lab of Ornithology is the leader, is the leading expertise on bird watching and birding. They have tons of apps, tons of resources, free resources, paid resources, everything that works wonderfully. And Merlin is an awesome resource, and it really teaches you how to identify. Basically what it does is when you download the app, you then download a pack. So I have a pack downloaded for the Northeast United States and maritime provinces of Canada. And when you go into that app and you see a bird you don't know, and you're out by yourself and you hit start bird ID and it checks your location, you select your location, you select date and time, you select the size of the bird, and it will give you a little range: robin size, sparrow sized, in between, crow sized, goose sized, etc. And you pick up to 3 colors and what the behavior it was doing: flying, in a bush, at your feeder, on the ground. And you select that and then hit identify, and it will generate a list based off of those with pictures that you can use as reference that is likely what you saw in your area.
Yep. No, it's a great starting place for sure.
Phenomenal starting resource, yeah.
Yes.
And recently, if you're on Android or on a website, Cornell's newest program is called BirdNet, and BirdNet actually takes bird recordings and identifies them. So there's no app yet for iOS and Apple devices, but Android has an app and there's a website, so you can take a recording on your iPhone and then go back to your computer and plug it in. It will help you. It's a little, it's still early on.
Right.
I found it to be mostly reliable. I'd say it has about 85% accuracy in the things I quizzed it with. The stuff it's got wrong are things that you can't really identify by sound anyway.
Right.
So those are I purposely tested it to see if it would get those things right or wrong, and it didn't, it didn't get them right, which is what I expected to happen.
Right.
But it's a phenomenal resource that's going to be coming hopefully soon to iPhone as well, to help identify things you're hearing, because that is an issue when you're out as a beginner birder. You hear a lot of things, you don't know what they are. You see a lot of things, you don't know what they are. It's a lot easier to identify things you see than it is to identify things you hear.
Yes, this is true. So, yeah, the song thing hasn't really clicked for me yet. So I wanted to talk to you about, since this is basically for beginning birders, about ethics, birding ethics. And it comes up quite a bit. Recently, there's been a lot of discussion of people getting too close to birds. And yes, they're adorable and such, but it actually can result in death of the birds or the failure of a nest or something. So the American Birding Association does have an ethics, birding ethics guidelines that we'll try and post for you. But what can you say a little bit about the birding ethics as a new person coming in? What should they be thinking about?
I'd say, at the beginning, a lot of them are self-explanatory. Follow posted guidelines at locations. Don't trespass on the private property. Stay on trails. And then it gets a little more in depth, and it really comes down to the bird comes before you. It comes before your photos.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to identify every bird you see. That's a well-known fact that all birders acknowledge.
Yep.
You're not going to see every bird. You're not going to identify every bird that's at that location in a given day.
Right.
So to be mindful of that and be careful. But especially this time of year, don't approach nests. Be very mindful. If the bird's behavior changes, if you're walking towards the bird with a camera or to get closer to get a better look, and the bird's behavior changes because it noticed you, you are too close. You should back away at that point slowly. This is especially evident on the shoreline. If a bird has its back towards you and is looking over its shoulder at you, you are too close.
Okay.
The bird is trying to use its back to blend into the sand or to the rocks and keeping an eye on you at the same time. If they start being very vocal and very visible, you are too close to a nest, you need to back away.
Okay.
If a bird starts dive bombing you, etc., again, you're too close to a nest. These birds are, once you start to get a bit of experience, you'll start to pick up on a bird's behavior of what it's doing that it normally doesn't do unless you're too close to a nest. Another thing out in the field, a lot of people at times use playback. They might hear a bird that they think they saw, or they think they want to confirm their audio, and they play the call to get a response.
Okay.
This is used a lot and should be used very sparingly.
Okay.
Especially this time of year when birds are breeding. You don't want to push a bird off territory. Birds sing to mark their territory. If you play a song constantly, a bird cannot beat a recording. A recording that can sing forever will eventually push a bird off its territory and potentially cause a nest failure.
Okay.
The only times I recommend using playback, and I would never really recommend it unless you've been with someone who can show you how to properly use playback, is in spring during the main migration periods of spring and fall. And that's simply because the birds are not on territory yet, or they've left territory. They're not going to be freaking out necessarily because of the chance of arrival. They're just trying to make it to their final destination. But again, you'd be very mindful, very careful. I rarely ever play it more than 3 or 4 times for a single species across a whole day, just simply because I don't want to harass the bird and lead it to being overly stressed and potentially leading to something that you might not see a nest failure. Right. You might not witness it firsthand, so you might not think it's bad, but it can stress them out. And for something that weighs a little more than an ounce, if you stress it out enough, it's going to have detrimental effects.
Okay. And you had once mentioned something about baiting. So what is baiting?
Baiting is something that not a lot of people do, but a vocal minority do when it comes to photography.
Okay.
And it is essentially feeding raptors, feeding owls with live prey, just to get the photo that you want. And that again comes back to if you're baiting a bird, especially a raptor, you're most likely doing it from a roadside.
Right.
The bird's going to associate the roadside with food, and possibly even cars, and potentially get hit by cars. So it's really, you should never feed a bird of prey. Right. Again, the welfare of the bird comes before any photo, any viewing opportunity that you have. The welfare of the bird comes first. Right. So especially if it's a younger bird, you might not, especially as a beginner, you might not be able to tell if a hawk or an owl is younger. And if that bird can't necessarily learn to hunt correctly, it could lead to either a death or an injury, a severe injury that leads to the bird not being able to survive or even it might just suffer through starvation, which is probably one of the worst ways to go.
Right. So it's a good, so again, for beginning birders, that's a good place to start, is knowing the ethics and the etiquette also of
Absolutely.
birding. So that's all helpful. Um, so we talked about bird guides and
Mhm.
how those are still at the core, probably the best tool. So
Absolutely.
what are some of your favorite bird guides?
I'd say there's two. My personal favorite off the bat is the National Geographic guide,
Okay.
and the selection that most people would say would be the Sibley guide, which you held up the Western version of the
Yep.
Sibley guide. They are probably the two forefronts. I do really enjoy Peterson as well, but those aren't updated as often anymore ever since he passed away. And the artwork is phenomenal. I think Peterson's artwork's the best,
Right.
but that's a personal preference. But I prefer National Geographic, especially from a beginner standpoint, simply because National Geographic is your more typical guidebook. It is descriptions on one side and plates of drawings on the other. So
Okay.
you have text on one, images on the other. Sibley is more columns with artwork at the bottom, maps at the bottom, and
Right.
written above it. So it
Right.
might be a little hard to compare
Hmm.
certain images, but it really comes down to personal preference. So I would recommend looking at the inside of the books, either at the bookstore or
Right.
go to the library, check them out,
Yep.
look online on Amazon to see the inside views, just to get an idea of the layout and figure out what works best for you.
Right.
Most guidebooks are in the National Geographic style,
Okay.
especially international guidebooks as well. The large majority are plates on one side and written descriptions on the other.
Okay.
Not many are columns. So if you like the consistency, then I would recommend National Geographic. Sibley has some phenomenal artwork as well. I mean,
Hmm.
he's a great artist that actually lives in Massachusetts. He's from Connecticut.
Yep.
Um, but I personally, from a formatting standpoint, I prefer National Geographic.
Okay, well, that's helpful. Definitely, there's something for everybody. So
Yeah.
I think I've used that one as well. Now, we started talking about some digital resources for new birders, so I just wanted to review that again. So first, there's Merlin, again, from Cornell University, probably the one I use the most. And Sibley also has an app. That's, again, the same folks that do that guidebook. BirdNet's in development, and that's for songs. And then there's eBird. I just want to talk about that briefly. So it's an app and a website. And eBird, I guess you could say, is based on citizen science. Um,
eBird is the largest citizen science project in the world, at least focused on birds. I think
right,
what people might have heard of iNaturalist is up there pretty
right,
big as well. That's a bit more general. That includes all biota. But eBird is a citizen science app developed by Cornell and website, ebird.org. It was founded early 2000s, expanded early in the 2010s to worldwide.
yep,
Basically, it's a listing service, so it provides you a way to keep track of all the species, because a lot of birders love to keep track of how many species they've seen.
mhm,
So it's a great way for you to keep track of all your species while also providing scientific data to Cornell that can be used to help research with these population declines, population trends, migration data,
mhm,
etc. And it's a really all-encompassing, it's a very deep website. You can search
yes,
individual species, you can search for areas nearby your house,
mhm,
go birding, you can check different times of the year,
right,
um, you can look at photos and take quizzes to practice. But the bottom line, you have the app, you go out in the field, you hit start a checklist, it starts tracking your location.
yep,
You put in the species you see or hear that day, you get to the end, stop your track, it asks you a couple questions, and then you hit submit, and it's simple as that. And it organizes all your lists for you. It does your world list, your country list, your range list. For example, the American Birding Association range is all 50 states and all of the provinces of Canada. It's
right,
considered the American Birding Association. Um, and it does hemispheres, it does continents, it goes all the way down to individual counties in
yes.
the US. And it does that all for you and makes really colorful maps that are really fun to fool around and explore with.
They
Just to
are.
really waste your time away.
Yes, that's true. I've been like trying to use them a little more to help determine where I want to go birding, and just to just it's a huge resource. And once you get into it, again, you're also making a contribution, which feels good. And
You, you, you
there
can,
are people double checking too. So if you put down something, like I was saying earlier, incredibly rare that probably wouldn't be seen in that location, someone will get in touch and be like, hey, do you want to double check that? So there are checks on it too. Even so, as a beginning birder, it's a little intimidating. You're like, I'm going to, mess this up and mess up the science, but there are some checks in place to just make sure things seem like they're accurate. So
yeah, and everyone wants to help. All the volunteer
yes,
reviewers are just that. They are volunteers. They want to help. They want to help provide data. They also want to help you learn. They might not have the time
right,
to explain why your species is what it is. They might do it a little bit, let you know that your photo actually shows this.
right,
And that's one of the instances where I recommend joining one of the Facebook groups if you want a little more information
yeah,
on the identification of a bird and how it was identified.
yep,
Because eBird reviewers are overwhelmed a lot of times. Not so much in Connecticut, but if you travel to somewhere like California or Texas,
yep,
where hundreds of thousands of people are submitting lists throughout the year,
uh-huh,
it's going to get to that point where they are stressed and they might
yes,
just send a generic email or ask you a simple question. And
right.
uh,
And
but they're
submissions are way up too during COVID, when a lot of people have taken up birding.
yes,
It's just sort of exploded to the point where it's hard to upload photos
yeah,
um,
it
to the
takes a
site.
long time.
So yeah, but it's cool, and you can definitely get lost in there, and it's fascinating. And again, you're making a contribution to the science. So
Yes.
eBird, maybe we'll talk about that more another time. Again, the citizen science piece of it. Um, so safety in the field. Right now, I know we're in tick season. There are some locations that are particularly buggy. So what do you recommend for safety in the field?
So safety in the field, I also combine with what outfit you should wear in the
Yep.
field. And my suggestions are always hiking boots,
Mm-hmm.
unless you're going on a heavily popular trail, like a paved bike trail or something.
Right.
Long pants,
Yep.
long sleeve shirt,
Mm-hmm.
and a hat. Always is what my go-to outfit is. Bug spray. I
Yep.
usually put my clothes in permethrin each spring, which is it soaks into your clothes. It lasts for 3 months or 6 washes, whatever comes first. I usually only wear my birding clothes when I'm out birding.
Yep.
So if I get home, I change out of them. So I might not wash them once a week or something. Um, but that's I highly suggest long sleeves and pants because you don't know what's out there.
Right.
I know some of my friends wear shorts because it's easier for them to see ticks. I just put my clothes in permethrin, and then the ticks don't bother.
Right.
I wear long sleeves because if I'm out in the sun and it gets hot, I'm at least staying protected from sunburn, which
Yep.
is a big concern, especially this time of year. And it also protects you from biting insects, which is a great thing. And then depending where I go, I usually have a pair of muck boots, knee-high muck boots in my car, a backpack with water or a like Camelback style hydration pack, sometimes bear spray on me if I'm going someplace, especially by myself,
Right.
which isn't so much of a deal in Connecticut with black bears, but it's always good to have just in case.
Right.
Um, but and then I always, for the most part, say more often than not, I let people know when I'm going birding. I let
Right.
family members or friends go. I say, hey, I'm going out birding today. This is where I'm going. This is what my general plan is for the day.
Yep.
If I go by myself, if I go with friends, I might not be as prone to let people know what's going on. But I do, if I go out by myself, I usually let my brother know or my parents or my birding friends to say, hey, this is what my plan is going to be. If you don't hear from me at all throughout the day, you just check in. My phone, I have an older iPhone, so it dies pretty quick.
Right.
Sometimes it'll die. I try to charge it when I'm driving. But I just, just simple outdoors
Mm-hmm.
safety measures are the best thing. I do carry, if I'm going on a long hike, I do carry a medical, a first aid kit with
Yeah.
me. I have a backpacking one I carry, which is designed for 2 days of survival needs.
Hmm.
You can get them up to 14 days, which are just really big.
Right.
I don't think you really need those unless you're with a large group of people, but it has all the necessary bandages, gauze,
Right.
Neosporin, stuff like that. Just in case something does happen, you can
Right.
take care of yourself and then hopefully just be okay. But yeah, it's always good and understand where you're going. I
Right.
very rarely go someplace that I haven't been before without doing maybe at least an hour of research.
Okay.
And that's finding the map of the location, understanding it, understanding the map, picking the trails I want to go on,
Right.
just understand the general area. Because you might not know how long a trail is.
Right.
You might not be prepared to do a 5 mile trail. For example, last month I was out, found a trailhead. I started walking on it and I made the decision. I said, this trail's a little too long, I'm assuming, for what
Hmm.
I have with me. So I'm going to turn back
Right.
and just make sure, I'm going to make sure I get back to my car because I know I can at this point. I don't want to get too far in and realize I probably can't make it back to my car.
Right.
And I think having water is imperative. I had an instance this weekend where I was out hiking in Vermont, didn't have enough water, and I ended my hike early, and I
Right.
went back to my car because I was not going to risk, being just really dehydrated in the field. I was already dehydrated enough; I could feel it, and I said, you know what, it's time. I didn't bring enough water. I acknowledged it. I
Yep.
wasn't going to push myself any harder. I was going to turn around and head back.
Yep. Yep. No, that's smart. So those are all really good tips. Um, and so how do you decide where to bird?
I think turkey vultures flying overhead.
Great.
I think it depends on what you want to do for
Hmm.
birding. If you're a beginner birder, it's great to do in your own backyard.
Right.
I'm lucky enough, as you can see behind me, I live in the forest, so I'm lucky enough that my yard is very birdy.
Yep.
If you live somewhere a little more residential and might not have as many diverse species, the local city park or a nearby park is always a great spot to get your feet wet.
Hmm.
Uh, I do recommend for a lot of beginners at least checking out some of the places along the shoreline
Hmm.
because, in my opinion, shorebirds and gulls and other things that are found along the shoreline they're a lot harder to ID
Yes.
than things in the woods, but they're also a lot easier to see
Right.
than things in the woods, especially when the canopy is all leafed out
Hmm.
like it is above us here. So I recommend going to the shoreline and spending some time with those birds. But I use eBird a lot to figure out, especially if I'm going somewhere I don't know. If I'm traveling somewhere, I use eBird to just find, and all the hotspots in eBird are color coded by the number of species that have been recorded there all time. So Connecticut's top two hotspots are Milford Point down in Milford, which is a Connecticut Audubon Society property, and Hammonasset Beach State Park
Hmm.
are the two biggest hotspots in Connecticut. Again, shoreline.
Right.
But I also, especially this time of year and what we've been going on and through lately, I've been using eBird and a couple other resources like OpenStreetMap and the Connecticut Council for Land Trusts to find some new unexplored areas that I didn't know exist, find some public properties, because maybe I won't see a lot of bird species, but maybe I'll find some place that I go, okay, during migration, I want to come back here and check this out. This has interesting habitat to me that I think could be hold something rare. And I think if you live away from the shoreline, birding inland's great because especially when it comes to Connecticut, a lot of our birders are focused on the shoreline,
Right.
are centralized on the shoreline. So by birding inland a bit more, especially in the Litchfield, Tolland, Windham, and Hartford counties, or even inland on any of the other ones, up near those borders, are great opportunities to explore and find new spots.
Right.
But I pick based off eBird, and then I also try to find places that aren't going to be super crowded.
Right.
Best time for birds is early morning.
Okay.
And at certain times of year is all time of day is good, but
Hmm.
best time is early morning.
Right.
So Hammonasset Beach State Park, we know, is very popular in summer.
Yes.
You can get there, try to get there when the gates open at 8 a.m. or something. You
Hmm.
have probably 1 or 2 hours before the crowds start to show up, and you have time to explore and enjoy.
Right.
It is very important to keep that in mind this time of year, especially if you're going out, that if there's going to be crowds or it's a crowded spot,
Yes.
you want to get out early. And that's because, not just because the birds are more active in the morning, but the less people, the birds are more active and more visible.
Right.
They're going to be out in the open a little more. They're not going to be hiding from what they see as predators.
Right. Plus, I know like Hammonasset, they're putting some limits on how many people can be in at once and such due to social distancing and such. So may also be worth checking before you head out somewhere what that
Yeah.
situation is.
And one of the best ways to check, if you're on Twitter, the Connecticut State Parks have a Twitter account,
Okay.
and they do tweet out when parks reach capacity.
Oh, okay. That's good to know.
So I found that out recently, and I've been using it a lot for my own personal exploration. I want to go to this park, and first thing I do is pull up that the Twitter account and see, have they tweeted out that park is closed, or have they tweeted it at all in the past couple days to give me an idea of, has it been filling up recently?
Right. Right.
The ones that have really been filling up recently are Rocky Neck, Harkness, Sleeping Giant.
Okay.
Are the three big ones that have really been filling up relatively quickly. There's a couple of other ones, Day Pond and stuff, have been filling up rapidly as well. But I would always check all your resources, because the last thing you want to do is drive an hour and get to a park that you want to go birding in and find out that you can't get in.
Right. Right. And I know recently, I have been sort of staying away from Milford Point, which is such a hot spot. There are so many nesting birds, and between people that live there and people that want to see, just seems safer to give them their space. I had some great looks last year, and this year just things are all a little different. So I think give them as much space as possible. So I think that's another consideration too. What's going on with nature at that location.
Yeah, and just like we said earlier, the welfare of the bird comes first.
Right.
So if you're worried about the place being crowded and especially nesting birds being harassed, and nesting shorebirds, which are very prone to being harassed by photographers, then take the sacrifice. Say, I'm not going to do that today. The birds are probably stressed enough. I'm going to go somewhere else.
Yeah. So let's see here. So more people are birding now with COVID. Again, there have been some interesting studies and numbers about people getting involved with it. So what kind of impact is it having on the birding community? Are you seeing that as someone who's sort of in touch with a lot of different areas?
I'm seeing an increase in a lot of the Facebook groups.
Okay.
A lot of the Facebook groups are gaining a lot of beginner birds, which is awesome.
Right.
A lot of people around the country are reporting seeing more birders out.
Yeah.
I haven't seen too many, but that's also because I've been focusing away from the general hotspots that everyone knows. I've been staying local, and because I do live up in Talon County, there's not as many birders out and about at some of these hidden spots that I'm finding.
Right.
So we are seeing an increase, which is awesome.
Yep.
The one thing that I really want to stress is that when you step out to start bird watching, you're going to realize that there's more birds than you may have realized before. You might see more cardinals or more robins, which is awesome. This doesn't mean that they're doing better because we've been quarantining. It just simply means that we're seeing them more because you're paying more attention.
Right.
They still need just as much attention as always when it comes to being conscious about your environmental decisions.
Right.
So I try to stress that to this new people I have run into. It's just that I'm happy. I'm beyond excited to have new birders and have new people willing to learn. It's my favorite thing in the world to teach and help. But it's important to stress that, the birds need help 24/7. They need your observance 24/7. So birding doesn't need to be something that is you traveling the world or country or state to do. You can very much be a birder and a bird watcher just from your own backyard. And that data to eBird is just as important as the data that those of us collect who go out on 10, 15-mile hikes.
Right.
They fill different data sets, but it's that residential data that helps a lot, or at-home data that helps a lot with us understanding what birds are doing in your yard.
Yeah. And the term you used before is a real term. You said your yard was birdy.
Yes.
That's a term. When there's a lot of birds, it's birdy. So
Birdy. And it's a phenomenal, there's something, I love it. Usually in May, I will come out at sunset and sit on my front patio and just listen to the bird song. Or I'll wake up early. I don't set alarms anymore because I wake up to the bird song. And my yard is birdy. And I know a lot of people, my parents included, always complain, oh, the birds woke me up.
yep,
Yeah, it woke me up too, but it's nice to sit there and realize that even with everything going on right now,
yep,
nature's persisting. The
yep,
birds are persisting. They're still there.
yep.
So I'm still hearing my cardinals and my Carolina wrens and my blue jays and house finches and everything else that calls my yard home. I'm still hearing them every morning. So that means it's a new day. I've made it to a new day.
Yep.
All victories.
There's new birds to discover.
There's new birds to discover. There's new stories to be told.
Yep. So we, so I see a bird, and I'm also a photographer, so I usually try and get a capture on it, which makes all the difference for me because otherwise I won't remember the details. Experienced birder will say, well, okay, it looked like that, but did it have, whatever? Did it have a little white on the tail? Did it, whatever, all these details. So say you have a bird and you just can't figure out how to identify it. What are some steps to take before you get completely frustrated and, say, I'm done with this? So how do you identify a bird that's tricking you?
It's tricking you, just like the steps in Merlin lay out.
Yep.
And there's 5 important steps to identifying a bird. First and foremost is the color.
Right.
What are you noticing about the bird? Second is, what is it doing?
Uh-huh.
Is it flying? Is it landing and flying from perch to perch? Is it soaring constantly? Is it feeding on the ground? Is it staying low in a scrubby bush? That kind of tells you and helps you narrow down which family or what it might be like. Color. Size is one.
Okay.
Size is one I'm very hesitant to use because something that's super close
Right.
looks a lot bigger than something that's super far.
Right.
A robin that is sitting on the railing of my deck behind me might look like it's the size of a blue jay,
Uh-huh.
but that it could be the size of a blue jay that's 15 feet away, not 4 feet away.
Yep.
The chickadee you see in a far tree might be the size of a kinglet,
Mm-hmm.
but when you see it up close, it might look like a warbler size.
Right.
It's very hard to judge size. So I use size, but never use size by itself. You need to use the behavior. You need to use the color.
Okay.
You need to, then another good one is proportions. Proportions is, how long is the tail? Is the bill thick? Is it needle-like? Is it hooked?
Right.
Does the bird have really long legs? Does it have long wings? Or does it have short wings? Does it have a crest? Does it, all these different just behavioral and physical clues that are besides the color.
Right.
And the physical proportions do change. That's why it's good to watch that behavior. Cardinal or titmouse doesn't always have its crest up.
Right.
But you can use other identifying features such as what it's doing, the sound it's making, the color of it to help you differentiate from other things. So the other one I would use is the sound that the bird is making. Is it singing? Like the chipping sparrow is behind me right now.
Who's that? Yeah.
A chipping sparrow behind me. What type of noise is it making? Is it chipping? Right. Is it singing? If it's singing, what kind of pattern is it doing? Is it doing that trill?
Right.
Is it doing a very complex, jumbly bounce?
Uh-huh.
And it's just important to note all these different details. And if you don't know what it is, if you still can't figure it out after looking through Merlin or looking through your guidebook, take those notes, write them down so you don't forget them, and then bring them to the Facebook group or put it on the listserv and say, this is what the notes I took. Can you help me identify? And you'd be surprised at what we can identify just based off of singular cues that you might not realize are identifiable characteristics. Right. I had someone last night on a page said, oh, I heard a bird. This was the habitat it was in. This was in Minnesota. They had grassland habitat. It said the bird was doing 2 chip notes and then a trill. Okay. And the top comment was, that sounds like a sedge wren. person said that's exactly what it was. Thank you. It was just, the habitat describes it. You didn't see the bird, but you got the description of the song down, you got the habitat down, and that helps people teach you and
Right.
help you identify things accurately.
Right.
And
So,
there's no shame in being wrong either on an ID. There's no shame at
yeah.
all.
And I would say for beginning birders, be very open to more experienced birders and such. It's a lot to absorb, and sometimes I get a little intimidated that I feel sometimes I'm the only one in the group that has no idea what's going on. But it's generally a very generous group with information. So just be open. People know more than you, and that's fine.
Yeah,
So
that's
be open.
exactly what I tell all beginner birders.
Yep.
And it's nothing to be ashamed of. I tell them two things. I say, one, you don't know as much as me. I
Yep.
don't know someone who's been doing this, don't know as much as someone who's been doing this longer than me. Well, they
Yep.
don't know as much as the person who's been doing it longer than them.
Right. So,
Or people who specialize. And that's nothing to be ashamed of.
right.
That's just a guaranteed fact. And the other one I tell everything is don't be afraid to ask questions.
Right.
Myself and others who've been birding for a long time, we understand, we can identify like that chipping sparrow.
Yeah.
I'm hearing it. Well, how did I identify it? And I'll tell you right now, I identified it because of the cadence of the trill. I know the habitat is correct. I know they breed in my yard. It's the only trilling bird that's found this time of year in my yard.
Right.
There are other trilling birds,
Right.
but I know that from experience.
Right.
If you necessarily know that and you want to know, then by all means ask the question.
Right.
The question is so important because it not only helps you, it helps us remember how we identified it.
Right.
Because it does become second nature to a lot of us. And a lot of times we forget.
Right.
We
So,
forget exactly how we did it. And by being able to share that knowledge, you're helping everyone else as well because we're reminding ourselves
right.
how we identified it.
See, now I feel like when I hear a chipping sparrow, I might remember it and be able to ID it because I'm hearing it now and you're giving me some context. So,
Exactly.
so just trying to pick up information wherever I can. Okay, so there's something called the life list. Now we'll get into a little bit of fun personal stuff. A life list. So if a bird is a lifer, it's a bird you've never seen before.
Seen or heard.
Or heard. Okay. Oh, that's a whole other thing.
Whole other thing.
The HO, heard only.
Yeah.
Everyone has most birders, I guess, have a life list. Everyone has different criteria for their life list. I know some people who only will count it if they photographed it. I know some people that will only count it if they visually have seen it, and some people that will count it if they've only heard it. And, they're confident in what they heard. So everyone's got different rules for theirs. So I'm going to say, how many birds are currently on your life list?
My life list is currently 904 species, seen between, I'd say 3 countries seriously. That's the United States, Canada, and Costa Rica.
Okay. So 904.
904 species, quite a few, and I'll be adding a few more next week when I go out on a little scouting trip to Montana.
Yep. Now, didn't you just get one this past week? I think you posted. Was there a bird?
I did not. I got a yearbird.
Okay.
This past weekend I saw Bicknell's thrush up in Vermont.
Okay.
Which was my 654th bird for this year.
Oh, okay.
That was an important milestone for me because on January 1st of 2020, my life list was 654.
Okay.
So in 6 months, I had seen the same amount of species that had taken me 6.5 years to see.
Oh my gosh.
So that was an important milestone to me.
That's fun.
And I keep a lot of lists. I keep state lists. I keep country lists. I do a lot of fun stuff.
Yeah, but that's an impressive total.
It is.
So, yeah. Okay, top 3 birding spots.
In Connecticut?
Whatever.
Well, we'll do both then. Top 3 birding spots in Connecticut that I've been to. Milford Point by far is my hands down unabashed favorite.
Okay.
Second place is probably going to be Hammonasset.
Okay.
Simply because of just some of the cool things that have been found there throughout the years, and it's a great rarity trap.
Yeah.
And third, I don't know necessarily what my third favorite spot would be um, in the state. It's probably going to be, as I sit here and try to visualize the map of Connecticut in my head, um, it's probably going to be the Connecticut Audubon Society Center in Pomfret.
Okay.
Just a completely different habitat from the shoreline.
Yep.
You get a lot of different birds. But I would also say right up there with it is White Memorial
Yeah.
Foundation in Litchfield, which is a phenomenal
Yes.
hilly spot. You get a lot of breeders there that you don't find in other places in the state, and
Right.
it's a great spot in the United States, or where I birded in general. Number one by far is McGee Marsh in Ohio, by Toledo, Ohio. It's a world renowned birding hotspot. I have wonderful memories there. It's a very important spot to me, not just for the birds, but for my development as a birder.
Yep.
So it has sentimental value.
So I know, so the marsh, if I get this correct, so the first 2 weeks of May are when the warblers and songbirds start coming back from the south, the
Correct.
tropics or wherever, and that's my favorite time. Those 2 weeks of May. So you should be training now for next May,
Yeah.
basically. We're in June, and you should be getting ready now, new birders, for next
Yeah.
May. So I guess McGee Marsh just gets an incredible variety and quantity and quality of bird.
Yeah, McGee Marsh is located on the shoreline of Lake Erie, right outside Toledo, about 25 minutes outside of Toledo, on east of Toledo, and it's part of the Mississippi Flyway, which is the multiple flyways are where the birds migrate up through from Central America. And because it's on the lakeshore, it's the last place they land before they fly up to their breeding grounds. They're going to land on the lakeshore, refuel before hopping across the lake. So it's a great place to get these birds congregating, and it also brings a lot of birders.
Right.
So I don't know what the official number was last year, but I believe it was close to 80,000 birders went there over 2 weeks.
Oh, okay.
Last year. Obviously didn't happen this year.
Right.
And it's not the only spot there. It's the famous spot there. There are other spots along the shoreline. There's a giant festival there that I've worked at in the past and have a lot of very important friends. I did go to school at Ohio State for college, so I did spend a lot of time up in Toledo.
Yep.
But it's just a phenomenal, very friendly. Every time I go back there each year, it's like a giant family reunion.
Right.
Between myself and the other guides and people I haven't seen, some people I haven't seen. It's gonna be 2 years now, and I see them again next year. Hopefully, fingers crossed.
Right.
It's just gonna be one giant family reunion.
Right.
But that by far is my favorite spot in the United States that I've birded. Another very important spot to me is the Caño Negro wetlands in Costa Rica,
Mm-hmm.
up on the Nicaragua border. It's just amazing taking a boat out into the wetlands of Central America and seeing things that you really can't even imagine exist.
I'm gonna do that with you. Okay.
Yes,
So we
please
know.
do. Yeah. And then I'd have to say, just in general, Maine. Maine
Yeah.
is number 3. Maine holds. I have family in Maine. I spent a lot of time birding in Maine, seeing the puffins and razorbills, which are relatives of puffins, and
Yep.
spending time in the boreal forests where a lot of the birds that we see, a lot of the warblers that we see in migration are breeding. So we get to go up there and see them on breeding grounds.
Right.
It's really hard for me to pick favorite birding spots.
Yeah.
I have a lot of memorable places, and I really enjoy traveling not only to see the birds and count them for my own life list, but to share their stories
Right.
in the Facebook groups. Because not everyone has the means to travel, and that's okay.
Yep.
You don't need, like I said before, you don't need to travel to go to be a bird watcher.
Right.
But I think those of us that do travel or have the capability to travel have a moral obligation to share what we see with everyone, because just as recycling is important here,
Yes.
it's not just for the birds here, it's for the birds in Central America, it's for the birds in Africa or Australia or anywhere in the world. They're all affected by the same behavior. So if we take the opportunity with our cameras or with our stories to even touch the lives of those who aren't birders and just say, hey, this is what's out there in your own backyard.
Right.
Not many people realize that we have the colorful warblers that come through.
I
And
had no idea.
you don't need to go to places like McGee Marsh to see them. You can go to places like East Rock and New Haven
Yes.
each spring to see them. And you will see things that you didn't know existed, from the brilliantly black, white, and stunningly orange Blackburnian warblers
Yes.
to the strikingly completely yellow, aptly named yellow warbler, to the Cape May warblers with their rusty cheek patches, to the magnolia warblers, which are yellow and black and blue and white.
Yep.
There's just these amazing color patterns found here in Connecticut. And
Yes.
Connecticut has over 400 species recorded all time. There are a lot of species here alone. You don't need to travel outside to see some amazingly colorful species. It's just a matter of sitting down and picking a spot and just being patient and waiting and listening and just putting yourself into nature and putting down your technology and your phone and stepping away from the TV and just listening.
Yep. I know this is my second, I guess, full season of birding. And I had no idea there were orange birds coming through. I had no, you kind of feel like I was asleep a little, and it definitely changes just if you're out walking around, how you look at things. And it's been a lot of fun. I share a lot of my photos, and it's a lot of fun seeing people in your life starting to get a little intrigued or having that same reaction, like, whoa, I didn't know we had that here. So you don't have to go far.
You don't have to go far. And everyone who's a bird watcher, well, not everyone, a large majority of everyone who's a bird watcher has a spark bird. Yep. The bird they remember is the reason they are a bird watcher now.
Yep. Your spark bird is?
I don't have one. That's why I had to fix that statement. I don't have a spark bird. If I had to pick, it would be barn owl, but that was because I always loved owls long before I was a bird.
Right.
But there was never a single bird. If I had to pick any bird that was extremely important in my development as a birder, it would be the first time I went to Costa Rica and saw purple gallinule.
Okay.
And purple gallinule is a large chicken-sized bird that's really like iridescent purple, blue, green, red. And they like the marsh areas, a lot like American coots, but cooler.
Right.
And we were on a boat, and I saw it. It was for study abroad, and I was the only bird watcher there. It ended up being my 300th life bird. It feels like forever ago. But when my classmates heard that it was my 300th lifer, they all congratulated me. And it was the first time I ever had felt respected as a bird watcher, but also it was at that point where the rest of those 5-6 days, they started asking me about what we were seeing, when we were seeing toucans, and they were actually showing interest. And I said, this is what I like. I like showing people. I like teaching people. I like showing them what we're seeing and being that helping hand, because you don't need to become a bird watcher as long as you have an appreciation for the birds.
Right.
And that's just as important.
Yep. I think for me, it was probably the magnolia warbler, actually. I happened into the migration, I guess the 2019 migration, which I guess was historically great. And
very good.
I just sort of happened into it. And I was like, this is great. I'm going to do this next weekend too. And people were like, no, you don't understand. Like, this is the day. Like, this is fallout day. Like, you may never see another day like this in Connecticut. It was just, I just didn't realize. But I think seeing the magnolia warbler, it was just, again, how is this here? Like, what is this doing in Connecticut? And how is this a regular thing I didn't know about? So, it's cool stuff. Okay. So we touched on that, spark birds. So top 3 birds you've seen.
Top 3 birds I've seen.
Just that you loved, or just really.
Yeah. I mean, barn owl has to be up there.
Yep.
I'm going to do top 5.
Okay.
Barn owl, resplendent quetzal in Costa Rica, which is the brilliantly green and red bird that has about a 3-foot long tail, the males.
What's it called? The resplendent
quetzal.
Okay.
Like the Aztecs worshipped it as a god, Quetzalcoatl,
Okay.
because it's just so beautiful. That's a bird that you look at and you go, that thing doesn't really exist. When you see it in real life, you're like, oh, never mind, it does exist. Um, Yellow-eared toucanet, also in Costa Rica, which is one of the hardest toucan species to see.
Okay.
We had it up. I've seen it up close. It actually made me cry. Um, and then roseate tern,
Okay.
which we can get it here. They breed anywhere, all the East Coast, the Caribbean, all the way up to Maine, and they actually glow pink in
Oh,
the
yeah.
summer. They have a very faint pink hue to them. And then blackpoll warbler, which
Yeah.
is it's a black and white looking warbler. It's not black and white warbler. It's
Right.
it's
Right.
blackpoll warbler, but it
Got the
is
black
black and white.
cap.
It
Yep.
has a black cap and bright orange legs and breeding, and they just have a phenomenal migration. I think a lot of people overlook them
Right.
because they do breed very far north in the boreal forests, and
Yeah.
but their migration is they weigh like an ounce. These birds are no more than 3 inches long, and each October, the whole species amasses on Nova Scotia,
Okay.
and then the large majority of them take off from Nova Scotia and fly 72 hours straight to Brazil,
Really?
non-stop across the Atlantic, no land for miles.
They
And
are
you do,
tiny. I saw some at migration, and they are. In fact, I missed a couple. I thought they were black-capped chickadees at first,
yeah,
and they were blackpoll warblers. So that's incredible.
it's insane what birds do when they migrate, and I think blackpolls are just they look a lot blander in the winter, in the fall, but
Right.
I think when they show up in the spring, I love them.
That's great. So,
So
and let's see here. Okay, so we'll just say any other tips that you think we missed for new birders?
the one final thing I love to say, and I think is imperative, is if you look a little bit longer and a little bit harder, this whole other world's going to be opened up to you.
Mhm.
You can watch a bird feeder for 10 minutes and see only common birds, but in that 11th minute, you have the chance to see the species that's going to change your life forever in a way you never possibly imagined.
Right.
So never close your mind to that.
Right.
Keep yourself open and willing to explore and to reconnect with the natural world that I feel like we continually step away from
Right.
as technology encroaches more and more into our daily lives. But I think just taking some time each day and just sitting outside and listening. You don't need to have your binoculars with you, but just listen to the songs of the birds and recognize that it's not only us that call this planet home.
Right.
It's over 10,000 different species of birds alone call this planet home. And just like you and I, just like every other human being, each one of those birds has a story about how it got to where it is in that instance. And sitting there and recognizing and trying to think what that story is. And if you see a migrant, a blackpoll warbler, anytime you see a bird in spring,
Mhm.
especially a warbler, for you to have seen that warbler that spring,
Right.
that bird needed to have either hatched or successfully bred in its breeding grounds, normally in Canada, flown all the way to Central and South America, and then back, never while weighing more than a couple ounces.
Right.
And that alone is something you can sit down and go, did that thing really just do that? And the answer is simply, yeah, it did, because I can looking at it with my binoculars right now.
Right. Right.
It did that. And I think I can't stress it enough that being patient, being observant, and understanding that birding, you're not going to understand everything immediately. I really enjoy going back myself and looking at my checklists from 2013 when I started. The park that I live a mile from, I have a list from 2013. I had 20 species there after spending 3 hours.
Right.
This past spring, I have a list from that same location 7 years later with 74 species on it.
Mhm.
Simply because it's 7 years of learning. That
Right.
doesn't happen overnight, and and I'm so grateful for the opportunities that I've had.
Yeah.
And I really think that beginners reach out to me, reach out to anyone. A large majority of birders who have been doing it for a long time will gladly, pun intended, take you under their wing to teach you,
Yes.
because we all love it.
Yes.
We love the birds. We cannot share them enough. If you are willing to listen, we are willing to talk.
Yep.
I think is the best way to put it. And I highly encourage people to join Connecticut Birds on the Facebook group,
Yes.
or Connecticut Audubon Birds and Nature Photos. I'm an admin on both of them. I constantly help with bird identification. There are some other phenomenal experts in the groups that help.
Yes.
And it's just a great place to learn. And you don't need to comment.
Right.
One thing I think we stress a lot is bird identification is not something you vote on. It's not something you guess at. A bird is a bird. It may look like something else, but that might be explained due to some reason.
There is a lot of voting. Yeah.
People do vote a lot, and I do have to be a little mindful, remind them that this isn't a
science.
debate.
Right.
If you see me or you see someone else tagging me and we're having a discussion, that's when you start to go, oh, this is interesting.
Yeah.
Like, what are they discussing? Because there are groups. There are groups like the North American Gulls Facebook page and the Advanced Bird Identification pages where I don't comment because I just want to learn.
Right. Right.
It's like I want to learn from these experts, but the Facebook groups are phenomenal.
Yeah.
Ways to learn and ways to share your photos, and we do have strict rules.
Right, for the safety of the birds. Yeah.
The safety of the birds. So we do delete posts that of owls or nesting raptors simply because they're what people like a lot, and it can lead to harassment of the birds. So we do delete photos of nesting shorebirds, but for the most part, everyone is super friendly.
Yep.
There is some, friendly banter that goes on between a lot of us who know each other.
Yes.
Outside. And it's also great joining these Facebook groups because they're names that you might run into in the field.
That's happened a lot. I get it
quite a bit.
Yeah. So it's nice, and these are people now I can text and say, do you want to go safely?
Exactly.
Safely birding, and it's wonderful, and everyone has their own strengths. Some people are great with the songs, and some people are great at just IDing with their eye, or some people are great with like photography tips if you're into that. So
I think I lost my train of thought there. Wow, that just completely derailed.
So that's probably a bird flew by and distracted you. So
yeah.
So anyway, on that note, I do want to thank you, Matt Bell. This is, I think, been a great conversation, and my life list is sitting at 196 and has been for a while. So let's go birding. Let me know.
Absolutely. Let's get you up to 200. As soon as I'm back from my Montana scouting, let's go out and send me what you need, and we'll find a spot and we'll go do some hiking.
Sounds good.
Perfect.
Okay, Matt. Well, thank you so much for this conversation.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Okay. Have a great trip.